Welcome, everybody. I see we have people who are joining in right now. Welcome.
Can you hear me well?
Yes,
It's
we can
okay.
hear you.
Okay, all right.
Welcome, everybody. We're waiting on about like another minute or two. I will be right back. Okay, everybody. We'll just give it another minute. While we're waiting for all the students to join, I will just tell you all that first, I know your school has been to the museum before. Welcome to those of you. And for those of you who have the students who might not have actually been to the museum, we're located in Los Angeles across from the Grove, if you know where that is. You can see the museum is on my virtual background behind me. This is Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust, which is the first Holocaust survivor founded Holocaust museum in the United States. That means that in the 1960s, a group of Holocaust survivors met and decided to create a memorial space for their loved ones who perished in the Holocaust. And that memorial that they created eventually became the museum, part of which you can see behind me. They did this with a mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire the future generations. Now, while we are unable to be in our museum's physical space right now, we have this opportunity that we can still fulfill their mission virtually thanks to equipment like Zoom. And so we're so happy that Louise is with us this afternoon. I almost said morning. It is this afternoon. And she will share her story with you. Louise Lerner is a Holocaust survivor from Paris, France. And Louise has spoken at our museum for about 2 years now, when she was one of our regular speakers before the pandemic, but now that we're working at home, she's able to still do this virtually. So Louise will start sharing her story in just a minute, but when just keep in mind you can type in questions in the Q&A box, and afterwards we'll go through them. You can type your questions in as she speaks, but also keep in mind certain questions she might answer during the rest of the talk, so you can also hold the questions. We'll wait 1 minute. You can also hold them for the end. Either way, she will answer as many as possible. So Louise, we are so happy to have you here, and you can start sharing your story with us.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be able to contribute to the task that the museum has, which I absolutely am very happy that you are doing what you are doing. It's very important, and that the new generations know what happened during the Holocaust, and the idea is that never again anything like that should happen. Don't let, don't do not, we should not ever let anything like that happen in the world. Well, I was young. I was born in 1938. So that's my parents, that the baby is me. And I was born in Paris, as I say, 1938. My parents came to France from Poland in Warsaw. They left quite all their family, sister, brothers, grandparents in Warsaw when they came to Paris. My brother was 8 years older than me, so he was born in 1930. So therefore, my parents came to Paris in the late 1920s, got married there, and as I say, I was born. Both my brother and myself, we were born there. So when the war started in 1940, my father, who was a Polish living in France, he volunteered into the French army. And when the whole army surrendered, he was for 5 years prisoner of war in Germany, but he was wearing the French uniform, and therefore his life was spared. The Germans respected the prisoner of war. While my mother, with my brother and myself, escaped from Paris, and we ended up in the south of France, in Toulouse. Toulouse at that time was under the Maréchal Pétain, he was in charge, but he was collaborating with Hitler, and he didn't last very long. And shortly after, the whole France was under the dominion of the Nazis. As I say, I was young. I was only 2 years old when the war started. But what I remember is what happened in 1943 when I was 5 years old. As I said, we were there living in Toulouse in a compound. We just had, it's a poor compound, we just had the 2 rooms on an upper floor. There was quite a number of units on the ground floor, and we had our 2-room unit on the upper floor. What I remember is one night we were told that the Nazis were coming. And so we were prepared. We made our packs, and we were just sitting in our room in the dark with our packs done, sitting there in silence, waiting for the Germans to come and pick us up. The Germans came in the compound, checked all the units on the ground floor, and didn't come to the upper floor. Maybe because we were sitting in the dark and the silence, and they thought that nobody was there anyhow. We were saved. So my next memory is we were on a train. My mother contacted the French on the ground, and we were on a train going towards the border with Switzerland. Well, we arrived there, we traveled during the night, we arrived there in the morning, and some of the people from the underground were waiting for us, took us home, and that evening we walked towards the border with Switzerland. So we walked, and we arrived at the border with barbed wire, and we were in the process of putting our things on the other side of the barbed wire when a soldier stopped us, halt. Well, luckily, it was a Swiss German who stopped us. And I must say, at that time, a lot of refugees were already in Switzerland. And so they had passed a law saying that only families with children under 6 will be accepted. Well, I was 5. So after some bargaining and discussing with the guard, he finally let us allow us to go over, and we started walking towards their post in Switzerland. From there, I guess we went into a refugee camp. My next memory was, I also must say, from somebody from the French underground uh, helped us to reach that border, but he had to escape, and my mother had to swear that we came there alone. That was the law in order to be accepted as refugee. Anyhow, so we were accepted, we were in Switzerland, and my next memory was I was in a hospital room. Apparently, I got a contagious, I was sick, I had a contagious sickness. And I remember being in bed in my isolation room with a partition and glass over. And I saw my mother coming and saying goodbye to me. I must say that the policy of the Red Cross, who they were in charge of the refugees, was to separate. Everybody was sent in different areas, to different directions. So my mother, I don't know where she went. My brother also, I understand he went to some convent that accepted refugees. And then I eventually, out of the hospital, I found myself on my way in the train again, going towards Locarno. Locarno was a city of course, in Switzerland, in the Italian part. I must say Switzerland it was divided in cantons, and in some cantons where they spoke French, in some other cantons they spoke German, and there was one canton when they spoke Italian. And that's where I was going to. I landed in Locarno. A couple, Ernesto and Vice Bernasconi, they didn't have any children, and they volunteered to take me in. And I must say, they became like my father and my mother. I was very happy with them. I learned how to speak Italian. They were Christian, Roman Catholic. So I went with them every Sunday morning. We went to Mass, but they never tried to convert me. They knew that I was Jewish, and they respected that. And as I say, I was living with them. I started going to school in Locarno. I also had a wonderful teacher in school, and she became very friendly with me, very close. And I also had a family. I had grandparents, uncle, cousins. And I must say, I spent 4 years in Locarno, and they were 4 happy years in my life. However, as I say, I was a refugee there, and the Red Cross was in charge of refugees. And it came a time for me to leave. The war had ended, my father and my father had been freed from the from um, a military camp. My mother also came back to Paris, and so I had to go back to Paris and rejoin my parents. It was a very painful separation because, as I said, I was happy with them, and as I say, it was difficult and painful to separate, but I had to leave and went back to Paris to meet my parents. Now, my father, imagine, he left when I was 2 years old, and I came back to Paris, I was 9 years old. So it was a difficult reunion. As a matter of fact, I haven't even forgotten to speak French. I had to learn again to speak French. And we never spoke about what happened in the years of separation. And that made a void in my spirit. But that was my life, and that was it. So, as I said, I had to learn how to speak French again. I I registered to go to school, went back to school, uh, managed to to put myself in place, and that was primary school. When I reached 11 years old, I could choose to go to secondary school in France. That was the system which I chose to. I had to pass an examination, an entrance examination, which I passed. And I started going then to secondary school. And it was a very happy time. Um, but in the meantime, in France, there was, of course, problems uh, between the United States and the Soviet Union. And my father was afraid that there would start, there was a lot of tensions, and there was afraid that a third world war would start. So my mother had a sister living in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And of course, unknown to me, my parents made an application to migrate to Argentina. And it was accepted, and the day came when they told me, well, we are leaving. As you can imagine, I wasn't too happy about that either, but I was at that time 14 years old, and of course, I had to go where my parents take me. And so I found myself on a 2 weeks boat trip because it was by boat. We arrived to Buenos Aires, Argentina. And we stayed there for a while with my aunt and uncle. And well, there I had to learn how to speak Spanish. And I had to apply to go to school there. I had to start again secondary school. And even before that, I had to pass an exam showing that I was capable of going to secondary school. Well, I managed, I was accepted, and I started secondary school in Buenos Aires. By that time, I also became a member of a Zionist Jewish organization, a Shomer HaTzair. And so on Sundays, I would go to my meetings. And so during the school, a weekday, I go to school, and on weekend, I go to my meetings of my movement. And so the the purpose of the to be in that organization is to migrate to Israel, to go to a kibbutz. A kibbutz was a communal farm, a way of communal living. So anyhow, I finished secondary school, and we had then a program of preparation before going to Israel. It was a farm outside of Buenos Aires. And I went there. I spent there 9 months, during which I learned how to milk cows and to be in the kitchen, and this communal work. But then I decided that that was not the life that I wanted. So I left the movement, and I just then decided to continue with my studies. Fortunately, in Buenos Aires, you can to go to university. We don't pay a tuition fee; it's free, and that was why I was able to do it. My parents were humble people. My father was just a tailor, and my mother would work with my father, finishing all the handwork. So we would not have been in a position to pay tuition. But because that situation in Buenos Aires, I was able to start university, and I chose to study architecture. So I managed to do the preparation course, and then I started my study of architecture in Buenos Aires. The study in Argentina is architecture 6 years. Well, so I was studying, but again in Buenos Aires, it's a very classist society. And at that time, we had a problem of okay, I remember, I forgot, I have that line. Adolf Eichmann, who was a very notorious general from Hitler. He was the one who organized the concentration camps in Germany. Anyhow, he survived after the war and managed to escape, and he came to Argentina. When he arrived in Argentina, there was a whole surge of anti-Semitism in Argentina. And with all my experiences with the war and what happened, I just decided that I didn't want to stay there. And I had an uncle in Israel, the only surviving brother of my father. And of course, my parents were in contact with him. And so I decided to go to Israel. And so I found my way. I applied and I was accepted, and I found my way to Israel. And of course, when I reached Israel, I had to learn how to speak Hebrew. And so luckily they had some intensive courses, 4 months intensive courses, how to learn for immigrants to learn Hebrew, which I went and passed, and then applied and was accepted to continue my architectural studies at the university, at the Israeli University in Haifa. So as I say, I managed to I learn basic Hebrew. I started the continuation of my career of architecture, and I went to the university, and over there, of course, life in Israel was quite hard. The Israeli students had to, when they finish secondary school, had to do their military service before going to university. And it was 2 years for the women and 3 years for the men. And so only after that they could come to university. So as you can imagine, when they come to university, uh, they come to class, and when the class is finished, they start immediately going back home. So there was not much social life at the university. Um, but at that time, Israel had um, accepted students from developing countries to come and study engineering. So the social life in the university was more with the foreign students that were studying there. I was like a foreign student too. And that's how I met um, an engineering student from Jamaica. We started a relationship and we decided to get married. And so, I finished my studies. 2 years I was at university and I finished my studies in architecture. He was still studying one more year engineering, and he had, of course, had to go back to his country. And I found myself going with him to Jamaica. So I reached Jamaica. Of course, in Jamaica, they speak English. So, well, I had a very basic knowledge of English. And I, um, I was lucky enough to find I was looking for a job, of course, and I found myself a job at the Ministry of Construction and Works of the government of Jamaica. And so I started working as an architect in that ministry. I must say I was the first female architect there. And I must tell you that I was never discriminated. I was accepted as a professional. I had, I never found myself discriminated because I was a woman, and therefore I worked in Jamaica all these years. Well, I eventually I left the ministry. I started my own business, and I worked. Uh, it was very satisfactory until it came the time when I was getting old and younger architects were coming into the, the market, and the work was getting scarce and I was getting old. I had a daughter. I forgot I had a daughter. And when she finished secondary school, she decided that she wanted to be an interior designer. And there was no such a faculty in Jamaica. So she came here in Los Angeles to the United States, where she studied and completed her study as an interior designer. And of course, she met here a man who became her husband. So she's married here. She married here. She she's now, of course, still living here, has two children. And it came for me a time to join my family. And that's why I am here, living with my family and enjoying retired life. That's my story.
Okay. Thank you so much, Louise, for sharing your story with us. We have some questions. First
Sure.
question is, how many and which languages do you know?
Well, French is my native language. And I also speak Spanish because I have lived a number of years in Argentina. I also speak Hebrew, and now I speak English. So that's it.
What message would you like people to get when they listen to your story?
What? Can you repeat that?
What message would you like people to get from listening to your story? What would you like people to learn from your story?
Uh, Sometimes all kind of experience of uh, happen in life, and someone has to adapt from it. Sometimes you cannot know in advance what will happen, but I just try to, wherever I found myself, to live and adapt the best possible way. And that's how I live.
Thank you. Did your parents ever talk about their lives about their early lives?
Unfortunately, no. We never, then at home, because I was separated for so many years during the war, I was in Switzerland, we were separated and so on. We never talked at home. My parents never talked about the family that they left in Poland, what happened during the war. We never talked. And now, when I talked about, now that I have the time to reflect about my life, I regret so much not knowing what happened. I know that my parents left their parents and some brothers and sisters in Poland. They never spoke about how life was in Poland, who was left there, and of course, I never got to know my grandparents, uncle and aunts, whoever was left in Poland, nobody survived. So we never had that kind of talk, family talk about what happened. And I regret that very much.
Do you know anything about your parents' families, about their siblings, brothers or sisters?
No, that's why I'm saying. The only thing I know is my mother had a sister in Paris, and that's why they went to Paris. And my father had a brother in Israel, and that's how I was able to go to Israel and be with my uncle before going to continue my studies. And that's the only, but again, they never talked about their family. I only knew that that's who they were, but they never talked about how they lived, how they, no, they never talked.
And what happened to your brother?
Oh, okay. My brother, as I say, was 8 years older than me. Uh, he, he did his military service in France and then came to Argentina, to Buenos Aires. He got married there, had two children, a boy and a girl, and he remained in Argentina all these years and just died uh, about 2 years ago. in Argentina. So, but again, I never sat down with my brother to talk about what happened to us during the war, where he was, where I was, shared memories. It never happened. And now that I have the time, and as I speak about my life and so on, I I regret it so much, and I feel I miss it. But that's it.
Was there a way that the authorities knew that you were Jewish?
Oh yes, yes, absolutely. When I came to Switzerland, as I say, I came through the Red Cross, and the Red Cross knew that I was Jewish. Yes, yes.
But do you know what the how they knew? Was it register? Were you registered somewhere? As was that on your official paperwork?
Well, remember, I came to Switzerland I, when I was 5 years old, and it was through the Red Cross. So obviously the Red Cross had all this information from my mother. So we were registered refugees there. So
What
yeah,
was
they knew.
what was France like after you returned there from Switzerland right after the war?
I personally had very few incidents of anti-Semitism. Uh, I went to school. They knew that I was Jewish. Uh, I went to the primary school. Then I went to secondary school. Um, I had very few incidents in my personal life of anti-Semitism. As I said, I went to a youth, a Jewish Zionist Jewish organization where I was very happy. I learned how to the songs, the Israeli songs, and so on. But although I knew that anti-Semitism exists, um, I didn't have. I had only a very few incidents. There was a few, but there were few incidents of feeling really anti-Semitism, of being called Jew, and this kind of thing. But as I say, I was aware that it existed, and especially
Right.
when I went to Argentina, it was even more um present, that feeling.
What happened to the family that you stayed with in Switzerland?
Well, it was a very painful separation. And while I was in France, and even after I went to Argentina, I always kept in touch with them. As a matter of fact, from France, before going to Argentina, I went to visit them. So I kept in touch with them all the time. I kept in touch with them.
When did you decide to speak about the Holocaust?
Only, only now when I am here in Los Angeles. While I lived in Jamaica, I never talked about it. The Over there, the Jews from there came to Jamaica um, from Spain when Cristobal Colon came and they discovered the New World, and that's when they came. And there was, of course, um, Isabel and Ferdinand saying that they were excluding, they were not allowing Jews to live in Spain. So they were in Jamaica for many years, and the Holocaust part of the Jewish history was not really very relevant or present in the community of Jamaica. So I never spoke about it. I only speak now here in Los Angeles when you have this program to speak to the youth, and I think it's so very important for them to know what happened, and as I say, never let it happen again.
Now that you live in Los Angeles and have time to reflect on your life, do you have conversations with other survivors, and how does your story relate to theirs?
Uh, we don't speak very much. We don't speak very much, and I, I only know a very few survivors, and as I say, I am a member of the senior center of Culver City, and well, now we are all sequestered at homes, and no, we don't really speak very much about our experiences.
Louise, you are a member of the Child Survivors of the Holocaust group in Los Angeles, which is, of course, I know no one's doing a whole lot now being at home, but can you talk a little bit about that group and how long you've been active with it?
It's still fairly new to me. I am not. I have been speaking a few times, but it's still fairly fairly new.
Right. So just I want to explain to the students, this is a group that was founded in the 1980s for survivors like Louise, who were children during the Holocaust. And in the 1980s, there was a psychologist who brought some of these people together. And now this is a group where it's, a group for survivors like who were, between called referred to as child survivors, between who were anyone who was a baby till about 16 roughly. And this is a group for those survivors to bond over their stories because these are survivors who, for the most part, were not in concentration camps. They hid or fled. And so this is like a shared experience that they have. And I just, Louise is active with that group, which of course is not doing a whole lot now, but this is
Yeah,
a very prominent group in Los Angeles.
yeah.
Um, let's see. Oh, this is a good question. You said that you regretted not talking to your family about what happened to everyone during the war. Do you talk to your daughter and your grandchildren about your experience and the experiences of other Jews?
You caught me. No, I don't. Neither. Uh, no, I should, but uh, my daughter is, well, her husband is not Jewish, and the Jewish culture is not that present here in the house because you don't want to antagonize her husband who is not Jewish. So no, I don't speak very much about it, and I am sorry to say, uh, it's a problem. It's a problem, and I'm guilty.
Well, we're so happy that you're sharing your story with students and that you're always very active with our community here at the museum.
Very happy.
Um, did you ever experience hunger during the Holocaust?
No, no, quite the opposite. I was with a wonderful family in Locarno in Switzerland. Uh, I actually I had a very happy time. That's the only time in my life when I really had a family, uncle, cousin, grandparents sharing and being in contact. I have lost that. I never had it after, and no, it's something that I have lost.
How do you feel about Germans in Germany today?
Well, uh, I must say I have to recognize, and first of all, I am very grateful that Germany has established a fund to help Holocaust survivors. And it's thanks to that that I can manage. I still receive a little money every 3 months, and it's very helpful to me. And I am also very, I won't say happy, but really grateful that Germany has accepted what they have done, and they try to make amends, and they try to help people, and as I said, to make amends about what happened during Hitler time. So I am very grateful and appreciative of what they're doing.
Do you, excuse me, do you remember getting bullied when the war started?
Getting what?
Bullied.
What's that?
Bullied by other people? Like, did people treat you badly when the war
No,
started? Whether,
no. Well, remember, I was very young at that time. So, no, I really have very few memories of that.
do you know how many countries you've been to and how many have you lived in? And but aside from how many countries you've lived in, do you know how many you've visited over the years?
No, I haven't had this luxury of visiting countries. So I only know, I can only speak about where the country where I lived, which is France, Switzerland, Argentina, Israel, and now Jamaica, and then now Los Angeles. But I have never had the opportunity as a tourist or as a visitor to go to other countries. I have never had that opportunity.
Um, let's see. Well, we have a lot of people typing in here that they're so thankful to listening to your story, and people are saying, one student said, "Thank you for speaking to us," and other students, "We appreciate your openness." Here's
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate those comments. Thank you so much. Thank you.
and, what did you build as an architect, and was it fun? Oh,
Uh, Hello.
oh,
Well,
Louise, we lost your video.
1 second. 1 second.
Oh, of course. While we're waiting for Louise to come back, I just want to thank everybody. You asked a lot of questions. Can't always tell offhand, how responsive our groups will be, but you guys were we get students are very interested. We always get questions, but we do have a lot of shy groups sometimes, and so I want to thank you all because
Yeah.
this has been a
Can
very interested group.
can you
Yes,
hear me again? Can you
we
hear
can
me again?
we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Yeah, because apparently there was a low battery coming into my iPad. I just
Oh,
plugged it in. So sorry.
oh,
Sorry,
that's
my
okay.
problem, my
That's
mistake.
okay. That's okay. Well, are you able to plug it into a charger, or did you charge
Yes,
it?
yes, it is plugged in.
Oh, okay, good. So if you see the camera icon, you can probably turn the video back on. It probably turned your video off just while you were.
Yeah, no, I cannot. I cannot.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, you know what? This is okay for the. We can hear you. So
Okay.
I wanted to read another comment. Well, actually, before, so the student had asked you about what kinds of things you built as an architect.
Well, I was just I built offices, houses, even a hospital ward. Uh, you know, just you know, yeah, general architecture, not interior. I used to do my own design, the design, and even I would go on site and supervise the construction. But as I said, I didn't do schools. Schools were for a different division. But as I say, I did hospital ward. I did offices. I did, uh, as I say, a few houses. That's basically it. Yeah.
Do we have, if we have any other questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box. And Louise, one of the students said, "You are such an inspiration to me."
I am so glad. And I must say, I must say, I was the first female architect at the Ministry of Construction in Jamaica. And I must say, I was never discriminated. I was never treated differently because I was a female. So I have known total acceptance. As a professional, I never had a problem. Hello?
Yes, well, thank you so much for your answer. See, we have time. If anybody has any last questions, feel free to type them in. I'll give you another minute or so. But in the meantime, I want to thank you all for being such a good audience, so attentive to Louise's talk and to her story. And we're so glad. I know that so many students were typing in just how much you appreciated hearing this story. And we really appreciate that. Just one last question, Louise. Did you ever encounter Nazis?
Once, once, only once. I remember being in Argentina. And as I said, when I was in Argentina, I was also a member of the Zionist organization. And uh, yeah, and I remember we went on a summer camp in the south of Argentina in a place called Bariloche, which is a tourist attraction. And there we met a German officer who they took refuge. A lot of Germans took refuge in Argentina, and they were in Bariloche there. It was the south of Argentina. And only once, yes, I met once.
No, I think I've
But
always thought, Louise, this is an interesting story. The only time you encountered a Nazi was after the war and in a different
oh
country.
yes,
So I think that I've always thought that was really interesting. All right, just one last question. Have you been back to Israel since the time you left there?
no, unfortunately not. And I wish I could, but I can't. It's just a financial problem.
Well, hopefully after the pandemic that will work out, because I would love for you to be able to go back there. Again, Louise,
I,
thank you so much for sharing your story with us this afternoon, and thank you so much to all the students for your questions and your attention. We will certainly love to welcome you back to the museum whenever it's safe, but in the meantime, please reach out to us. Again, if you would like this opportunity, we have several virtual programs for students. Summer and fall will be doing this, so please keep in touch with us, and we hope to welcome you back at the museum as soon as it is safe. In the meantime, thank you, and we wish everyone a happy and pleasant, safe week.
Anytime, Michael, you know that you always can call me. I am always available, and it's a pleasure to be there, to be able to talk and to participate in your program. I'm feeling very okay. Bye.
We are so grateful to have you in our community, Louise. Thank you so much. And all the students that are just typing in and the teachers are typing in, thank you so much right now. So everyone is thanking you very much.
A pleasure. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.